Hey everybody, really looking forward to seeing many of you this Thursday at 7 o'clock here at the Met for our first live gathering of the year. And today we're going to think together about the word obedience as we continue our series in the YA Weekly Word. Obedience. And as I was pondering this and thinking it through, this very important biblical theme that traces itself out from cover to cover in the scriptures, it occurred to me that I think many of us are probably more comfortable with the prospect of being followers of Jesus or following Jesus. And it probably moves us more into the realm of discomfort to think of the prospect of obeying Jesus. We're probably comfortable affirming truths about God. We're probably comfortable proclaiming facts about Him or affirming them, rather than we are comfortable obeying the commandments of God or obeying the teachings of Jesus, as they're radical moral commandments that we find in the Sermon on the Mount and the Ten Commandments and passages like these. But today I want to think together about obedience as it relates to two doctrines. And first, the doctrine of justification, and then obedience as it relates to the doctrine of sanctification. So first, obedience as it relates to the doctrine of justification. And there's a passage in Romans 5, and I just want to focus on one verse together, and it's verse 19, Romans 5:19, where Paul says, "For as by the one man's, namely Adam's, disobedience, the many were made sinners." So, in other words, the many, meaning all who would follow in Adam's footsteps as image-bearing humanity, were made to be sinners by Adam's disobedience. So, in other words, we aren't first and foremost sinners because of the individual sins that you and I commit, our own active disobedience, but rather the sin of Adam through his disobedience placed us in a state of sinfulness. So by the one man's disobedience, the many were made sinners. So by the one man's obedience, the many will be made righteous. Namely, Jesus' act of obedience to his Father in heaven to go to the cross and bear the curse that we deserve for our disobedience, even though he never disobeyed. So the obedient one, taking on the penalty for our disobedience to make us obedient in God's eyes. It's the doctrine of justification. So we receive by faith the blessing of Jesus' act of obedience throughout his life. So by the one man's disobedience, the many were made sinners. And through the second Adam's obedience, the many are made righteous by faith. But how about with regards to sanctification? I want to think together about one verse in John 14 and verse 15 in the life and ministry of Jesus before he went to the cross and before he ascended to God's right hand. He said, "If you love me," and the stakes are high here. That's a big condition. "If you love me, then what? You will keep my commandments." The Net Bible, some of you may not be familiar with it, but it's an interesting translation. It actually says, it portrays Jesus saying, "If you love me, you will obey my commandments." I think the New Living Translation also says, "If you love me, you will obey me." And I found that to be so challenging, knowing that his commandments include things like never looking upon a woman with lust, things like never being angry against a brother or sister, things like always praying without ceasing, things like rejoicing in all circumstances and never giving up, giving thanks to God, abandoning all pride. These are things that Jesus commands us, and he says if we love him, we'll do it. But he doesn't leave us alone into our own devices when we're to obey him, because he says, "I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever." So the Spirit of God is to be our helper as we express our love for Jesus through our acts of obedience toward him. We don't receive justification through our obedience. We established that from Romans 5. But we do move along the road of sanctification as we express our love for Jesus, as we seek to obey his commandments. Grace and peace to you all.